We've had our hands on Predecessor for multiple weeks and multiple patches now. I think it's a good time to share some thoughts. Welcome, internet strangers. Truth in here. Let's dive right into this video. Early access is a tumultuous time for any game, and I've got to say that I'm pretty impressed with how well that Predecessor is navigating it. We're going to start with some pros. The first and probably most important on this list is the fact that the game feel is dead on. The jank is low, the skill ceiling is high, and interactions are consistent, one of the things that I was very worried about. An example here is the fact that anytime that you have a steel dash versus a Grux knockup dash, the steel dash will go through the Grux knockup every time, cancel the Grux knockup. There can be conversation about if that's the way that that interaction needs to happen, and several more like it. This is just an example. But the fact that it works the same way every single time is huge in the game's future ability to then balance those interactions. In Paragon, there were a bunch of abilities back in the day that interacted differently, seemingly based on the direction the wind was blowing, and Grux's charge after his rework was among the biggest of culprits. So the fact that Predecessor kind of has this worked out is huge to me. And just on a few more anecdotal notes, the fact that I can play Kalari and it feel fluid, like she's an actual assassin, the fact that I can be jungling with Rampage and animation cancel with his pummel and then throw rocks at things and it feel good, I just am in love with the way that Predecessor plays. It is smoother than Paragon ever was in some very important ways. I think a big testament to this for me personally is the fact that I enjoy playing Grux now. Grux does not have the kit that I would have given him if I was in charge of creating heroes for a meta, and at this point I'm glad that I'm not, because it is so fun to be able to dash in on somebody, knock them up, hit a double pain, and as they walk away, animation cancel in some basic attacks with a pull. Even in Paragon, when Grux had a kit similar to this version of Grux, it didn't feel this good. Let's move on to another pro, and one that's hopefully a little bit less subjective. I know the gameplay feel is a feeling, but I want to talk about the fact that the Ometa team seems to understand hero balance and gameplay systems very deeply. Balance is always going to be huge in a competitive hero-based game. You've heard me say the word several times this video, even indirectly mentioning it. So let's dive into this. One of the first things I think that proves this is that after our first real patch, there's no S-tier heroes anymore, and there's never been a D-tier hero, even before the first patch. This isn't a tier list video. I'm not going to get into that. There are some great creators out there that do make them. Maybe we'll do it in the future. I don't know. You guys let me know if you'd like to see that. But I think that shows a deep understanding of what their heroes are meant to do and the balance in between them. There are games that have been out for years and go months and months without every character in the game being playable. But if every character in Predecessor right now is between B and A/S tier, if I was to make one, I might put 2 characters in like an A+ tier. That's huge. That's more than many games do in their entire lifetime. They've also shown that they're capable of adding heroes into the existing player pool and it not break everything. We have had our first hero release in Countess, and when she dropped, I would have probably put her a little bit in the stronger side. Mind you, not nearly as strong as Crunch was in the first patch, but still. And within 7 days we get a patch realigning her to be more balanced, and to the point now where I think she fits perfectly between that B and that A is really impressive, and I think a good precedent for the future. It's also one of the things that I've come to appreciate about Ometa as a dev team when it comes to how they make buffs and nerfs and changes in general. They just understand what the problem is and attack it from the correct angle. Using Countess as an example, in that 1 week patch after her release, yes, she does a lot of damage, and she can actually be built somewhat tankily in this game, which I think is really cool. You can use a build similar to the one that I like to run on Sevrog on Countess, but that led to the issue where her sustain was kind of too strong. So what they did was honestly really impressive. They attacked it from multiple angles. They didn't just nerf her damage from a flat number. They reduced scaling slightly, and they reduced the healing that she gets out of her ultimate, so she couldn't just ult a Rampage mid-fight because it was the closest thing to her and then get a third of her health back. And it wasn't overly done. Countess is still strong, and you can still play her in multiple different styles of play and multiple different roles, which is something you couldn't do in Paragon with Countess. I spoke at length in some of my earlier videos about having multiple levers to balance is almost always better than having a perfect balance on a single lever, and I think that Predecessor has gone a lot to prove that to be true. The last thing that I want to touch on in the area of balance or gameplay systems is how Ometa recognizes when things aren't perfect. They have been the first to acknowledge that they want more verticality in their map. They've been the first to acknowledge that Fangtooth and Orb Prime probably need some changes, and they've been very open about the fact that this is a true early access game, and there will be more changes coming to the areas of the game that they are not perfectly satisfied with, and that our feedback has an effect on that. Which leads me into the third thing that I want to talk about that I think is a pro all the way for Ometa Studios and for Predecessor, and that's the level of community involvement that they are encouraging. The Ometa team have been among the most transparent I've ever seen a dev team when it comes to their goals and ambitions for their game. Certainly that I've seen or that I've interacted with. We've gotten in-depth patch notes for every change made, as talked about earlier. We've gotten a roadmap through the beginning of 2023 and some conversation about what's to come after that. We've gotten videos confirming plans and intentions without a ton of the vague corporate game company speech that I'm sure we've all been forced to get accustomed to from other studios. And as we speak, at least as this video is being recorded, there's an AMA going on Reddit with the devs right now where they're answering questions. I'll be the first to recognize that there was a good bit of criticism for the dev team going pretty much silent for the better part of 2022, but I'm confident that they've made up for it now at what I would consider a far more critical time. Just as a final note on this, it's not a very common thing, or something that we should take for granted as gamers, that if you ask a question on Reddit, there's a chance that the CEO of the studio will be the one to answer it. Okay, so let's move on from the pros to the less than pros, and realistically there's only one worth talking about, and it's the obvious glaring one, that the game lacks content. This has been discussed to no end already, so I won't add complaints, I just want to add to the discussion. I get why Ometa is doing what they're doing. They want a true early access. There's a reason that they did a paid early access, so that you get a true first impression from people that want to be there, and you don't scare away the free-to-play players before the cake is baked all the way. But I also understand the other perspective that matters here is from the gamer, and it's 2022-2023, and it's sometimes hard to convince people to play a game when there is, quote, nothing to play for. Predecessor is a unique situation where the game itself is in its infancy, but its player base is not. Many of us have been playing Paragon for years and waiting for this project ever since the day that Epic broke all of our hearts. On the highest skill end of the player base, you're asking players, since there's no replay system, no tournament structure, no competitive, and no ranked mode, to have 10-minute queues or 10-minute games because it's going to be a stomp in one direction or the other. And then on the lowest end, first-time gamers are ending up in lobbies with Survivor and other former Paragon pros, and they don't even know the names of all the heroes. All this when they don't even have the option yet to play against AI characters. Now, in the middle of those two extremes, I've found that there's some pretty good games to be had. Matchmaking does a decently good job putting together what I would call the majority of the player base into decent lobbies. But I have personally witnessed a former Paragon professional roll into lane against one of my friends that I'm introducing to the game, and in the same breath that he's asking what Richter Silence does, he gets rolled by a player that's just far better and far more experienced. Now, it would be easy to blame matchmaking or whatever for this problem, but the underlying issue is that lack of content as discussed. It is hard to get people to play a game when there is nothing to play for. As stated, I don't have a huge issue with this today. If it was a year from now, my opinions would be very different from what they are today. But as of today, I think it's actually a wise-ish business move. The team at Ometa gets a wealth of player data as how to go forth balancing their game and adding features and what order to do so. You get the opinions of players that you would otherwise not have had, and you get the gameplay feedback that you need that you just can't get from a small team of internal testers. As players, we get to play the dang game, and I know that not everybody that's going to be enough, but for me and my friends, we've had a hard time putting it down. I wanted to get this video out 2 days earlier, but my boys were on, and it was hard not to just queue up instead of sitting here and talking to a camera. I've heard some very smart and very plugged in people say that they should have delayed the release until February or something like that. And I don't know, maybe they're right, but for my money, I would be willing to bet that the Ometa team has gotten everything out of this launch that they had hoped for. And the players like me that have been waiting pretty much since the day Paragon died to have a game back that they want to play, get to play the game. I think it's a win all around. And as players, potentially the best news about all of this when it comes to the lack of content is that will be solved in time. I would be willing to bet, for whatever little that it might be worth, the reputation of my channel that a year from now, that Christmas week 2023, Predecessor will be better than Paragon ever was. And I have a feeling when that day comes, that this period of time that feels very transitional and kind of up in the air will be a pretty distant memory. But that's it for this video. There's more I want to talk about, but we'll save that for the future. Tell me what I missed, tell me what I got wrong, and your thoughts on how early access is going for Predecessor here. On a final note, I did want to apologize for being absent for a year, provide some amount of an explanation. I did get invited to internal test for Predecessor for a short period of time, but everything that I got to test is now public knowledge. And between moving 4 times and my position at work changing 3 times since the first Predecessor video came out, life has just gotten hectic. But I do plan on being back now. I am streaming regularly again, and just look forward to interacting with all of you guys out there on the battlefield.
To walk away, I'm hoping that you still make me have to stay, 'cause I'm floating in your orbit.